Welcome, everyone. Today is December 15th, and welcome to the WSBA Crypto Roundup. We have a lot to cover today, and I'm looking forward to introducing one of our new guests as well, as he'll bring his interesting perspective on valuation, accounting rules, and financing into the realm of our conversation. So I'm David Brill, based here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, with my co-host.
Quaranta here. Good to see everyone.
And welcoming Casper Schouten here today to join us. Casper is with Teknos Associates and a longtime member of the Crypto Asset Working Group. And he's really excited to talk about some of the interesting trends he's seeing in the market.
Yeah, they should be fun.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you joining us, Casper. And before we begin, please keep in mind that nothing discussed today should be considered accounting, investment, legal, or tax advice. And the opinions expressed are our own and may not represent the views of our respective firms or companies. Well, with that being said, we seem to be on the precipice of a Bitcoin ETF, as there's a lot of talk and a lot of interest in that. Ron, I'm hearing from people that maybe the first 2 weeks in January is the time for a Bitcoin ETF to be approved. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm hearing similar, David, and certainly we've seen the pent up hype and interest in a potential Bitcoin ETF and the big names that are focused on it. I think there's a deadline, and forgive me for misremembering, it's probably January 10th for approval or disapproval of some of the ETF applications. And I think one of the interesting things about it, and I love your opinion and Casper's opinion, we're starting to see the granular conversations about a Bitcoin ETF, which we didn't see before. One of the things I brought up and I mentioned before we started was redemptions. And it seems like these ETF providers, big names, VanEck, for example, and BlackRock, are getting into the details with the SEC, which kind of feels like that's the conversation you need to have to go to market. Casper, are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, in a while ago, the discussion was like, oh, are they actually going to go for this? But now they're going to such length and detail that after the court ruling saying on the grayscale trust, that now it just appears that they're trying to iron out very specific things, which makes me think like, okay, well, it is pending whether it will be that within the Jan 5th to Jan 10th deadline. A lot of people seem to think so.
Yeah.
I personally think so as well, but yeah, we'll see.
And David, just if I could throw one more thing on that, you and I go old school in these conversations sometimes. When I see DTCC with two symbols for Bitcoin ETF trading, I'm like, all right, the possibility went up significantly.
Yes, we have all the indicia of it moving forward. And these conversations are very important with the commission about the mechanics of the offerings. Personally, I would have liked to have seen them been had earlier than now, so that if there were additional comments related to using, whether it be cash or in kind, that they've been hashed out by now. But as we all know, the process is what it is. But there's really a lot of bullishness around an approval in the first half of January. And so, the optimist side of my brain is feeling bullish about it. The pragmatic side of my brain, knowing how long it's taken us to get to this point, is also sort of wondering if there's something that we're not seeing that will delay it a little further. But I will say I do feel bullish on a Q1 acceptance for it. And, the other thing we should talk about, and maybe not today, but just in general, is, how long will it take to actually go to market? So if you get an approval, and let's say that the seeding has been done, will we see it go to market in 3 business days, 2 business days? Is it going to take a couple of weeks? So I'm sort of curious to see that. And then on the other issue is how many of the outstanding filings are going to be approved. And so obviously, is Grayscale going to be approved? So in that first tranche of approval. So I think as the ETF turns, I think there's still some drama to be played out there. And, let's just see what happens in the near future. But I think it is, by all rights and intents and purposes, a bullish moment for the ecosystem.
We hear the spooky winds in the background as David pontificates and tells us about ETFs coming up. But I totally agree with you, David. I guess the question I've got is there precedent for the SEC to approve a boatload of ETFs in any market segment, or do they have to approve them singly, individually? I don't know.
Look, the fog of war over the ETF is in the background. I think the reason why to do multiple approvals is that to not give one filer an advantage. And if
Right.
they've all filed in a similar window and it has taken quite a long time, you don't want to unfairly award it to one party and then sort of the other parties are playing catch up.
Yeah.
That first mover advantage is meaningful in this space. So
Yeah.
I would assume we'll see a number of them approved at the same time. And, we'll talk about price a little later, but I have some thoughts about where the market will go, pre-approval and then post-approval. So interestingly enough, now we'll have this ETF, but Casper, if companies in 2024 are looking to hold crypto assets on their balance sheet and or hold the ETF on their balance sheet, I understand there's a new rule that was passed regarding how that's going to be accounted for. Maybe
Yeah.
you can share some insights about that with the audience.
Yeah, that's right. So the Financial Accounting Standard Board has approved now the latest ASU that is going to transition the accounting treatment of tokens held on a balance sheet from being held at cost minus impairment to at fair value. And this is a pretty big deal for a company like MicroStrategy, right? Like Michael Saylor's MicroStrategy, they're holding an enormous amount of Bitcoin. And essentially, to put it in layman's terms, they were only allowed to hold it at the lowest value they've ever had to report it, that they impaired it down to. So now, but they were never able to, mark it up. Now it's going to be marked at the fair values. So there's going to be a much better and more accurate representation of said holdings, on their balance sheets, and it will also make their way into the income statements. So it's very, very important from from the perspective of those companies that do hold significant token stakes. Now, there's a number of exclusions on this. So NFTs are excluded, wrap tokens are excluded, and token issuers are also excluded. So the tokens that are being generated by the projects themselves, they still cannot mark them as fair value. So that's definitely something that I would hope they would address next. Although there's not really a lot of signals out there that's on the top of their agenda right now. So there's still some complications with the current guidance for like more unique situations, but they've really just tried to get something out there in a expeditious manner, as opposed to like fully comprehensive.
Casper, if I could just throw in a question there. One of the interesting things when I look at news about the FASB ASU, and what does ASU stand for again? I keep forgetting.
So I'll have to owe you that.
It's not just me. But when I look at that news, which generally the industry looked at pretty positively, right? Now public traded companies can recognize the upside of crypto and have to recognize the downside. One of the things that struck me was what's going to happen to Wall Street analysts when they have to do valuations on public companies that hold significant amounts of crypto. And then around the same time that I thought that, CFA Institute put forward their guides of valuation of crypto, I believe for public companies. Is it going to be hard for the industry to understand the value of a public company if they're holding significant crypto, or does this make that valuation calculation easier?
Well, it's going to be more transparent, right?
Right.
So the holdings on the balance sheets are going to be more accurately represented. So if you're trying to get a sense of where a company is in terms of value or in terms of like the assets it's holding on its books, it's going to be much more transparent. So from that perspective, it's going to be easier. Now, of course, with digital assets, considering its volatility and the ever-changing environment, like it's not always that easy to value those assets, especially when you're talking about something else but Bitcoin or the super large caps. But yeah, in general, this is going to make it quote unquote easier for the layman to have a better understanding of what these companies actually hold. Because if you look at MicroStrategy's balance sheet today, they're significantly underreporting their assets.
Yes.
So
yeah, definitely MicroStrategy must have been Mr. Saylor must have been applauding.
well, he was a big advocate of
yes.
this. You know, they were talking about this. They've been talking about this for years.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very important part of the ecosystem and allowing companies to hold crypto. Otherwise, they'd be pretty much holding it as a loss, because if it,
That's exactly right.
yeah, and so that's problematic, obviously.
It's been a hurdle for a lot of big enterprises and, you know, other companies that would like to have some on their, you know, treasuries or whatever, you know, to actually get involved with this. Because think about it, if you're going to your board and say like, hey, I would like to replace our cash reserves with you know, some Bitcoin, and then what you're telling them is like, okay, well, we can only record it for whatever its value today, even though I think it's going to appreciate, but we'll never be able to recognize that on our balance sheet. So the board of a public company is going to be like, that sounds like a very bad sale. Like, that's not great.
That doesn't go over well with the boards.
No. So, you know, like big corporations are now going to be, you know, have the ability to do that if they wanted to, without the, you know, the downsides of it. So it's great for the Bitcoin adoption narrative.
Yeah. And look, Bitcoin's only up 180 something percent this year.
Yeah.
So,
So
you know,
the one other question, David, can I throw this out? And this is my ignorance talking, but I'd love your opinion and Casper's
Sure.
opinion. When you look at a MicroStrategy or a Tesla, they're pretty comfortable, relatively speaking, with holding a Bitcoin, for example. Are we looking at things like custody challenges or the mechanics of holding Bitcoin for other public companies? Will that be a roadblock?
Well, I think that custody is always a challenge in this industry.
Yeah, fair.
Whether it's for me and you personally, or for like large corporations. I mean, that's why the vast majority of Bitcoin for all these ETFs, like Coinbase is going to be their custodian, right?
Right.
So, so yes, custody in digital assets is always an issue, and, you know, sort of like cybersecurity vulnerabilities, et cetera, et cetera. So there's going to be a big play for custodial players to, you know, for you know, going forward.
Thanks. Got it.
yeah, custody is continues to be a challenge.
I mean, just yesterday there was the ledger.
Yes.
Right? So maybe that's a good bridge. I don't know if you wanted to go there, Ron, but you know,
I'm happy for you to dive into that, but that's one of the things that makes you shake at one point and think about what I've done with my ledger, you know, cold storage. But if you wanted to let the audience know, I think it's important.
no, I mean, I don't know the depths of it, but I do know that Ledger is typically one of the most trusted cold storage solutions within the space. And now, apparently, through some kind of phishing activity on a previous employee, there was bad software going around, malware going around that, you know, allowed for vulnerabilities once the ledger connected to certain decentralized apps. And that's scary from the perspective that cold storage is typically, you know, considered to be the best way, the safest way to store your crypto. So that was not great, but you know, it goes hand in hand with the custody issue that you just, you know, brought up.
Yeah. And David, you've often brought up, you and I've had these conversations about cold storage. A little bit of this is know what you're doing. And I think, interestingly, you know, the hack, as it were, it comes from the intersection of cold storage wallets at Ledger and DeFi apps on the Ledger.
Mhm.
So, no, David, again, you and I have had this conversation. Casper, you and I have separately had this conversation. A lot of people aren't really suited, at least right now, to engage the UX for DeFi.
Yeah. Casper and I at our holiday event last week, we're talking about that. And, you know, I'm a big fan of staking and looking for different opportunities for airdrops or yield. And some of the protocols are very hard to deal with. And I'm not a big fan of bridging, because I feel like every time you bridge, your tokens can get stuck. Bad outcomes can happen, and it's you know, it's a riskier endeavor. So I think this still continues to be an issue, and it's one of the reasons why I think when we do see a Bitcoin ETF approved, that will see meaningful liquidity come into the market for people who want to have exposure to this risk class, but don't want to have exposure in the way that the traditional crypto people have exposure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really hard to guesstimate how much money will come into the market, although some smart people have made some bets on that. But I really do see a whole cohort of people who will be happy with an ETF and just the wrapper, and know if they go into their Schwab account or their Merrill Lynch account, that they know that if they buy 10 shares in the Bitcoin ETF, it's not going anywhere.
What about the RIAs, David? Like, one of the things I've been reading about is there's going to be this potential upswell of registered investment advisor interest, because previously they're generally not able to talk to them about owning Bitcoin directly. There's no easy custody solutions for anyone that's a registered investment advisor on behalf of their clients. But the thousands and thousands of RIAs in the United States can hold an ETF,
Yeah.
correct? I mean,
Yeah,
that opens up huge money.
Well, look, I think like I said, I think there's a lot of people who want to put a few percentage points of their portfolio in riskier assets, and in particular crypto and Bitcoin. And so I think this is a way for them to do it more elegantly. There will be some fees, but they can do that. They can have it in their brokerage accounts and have the comfort that there won't be any, loss of value through, nefarious means, or just losing it in the ordinary course. So I think that is important for sure. I'm sure, Casper, for your clients, you see that, how the handling and custody and treatment of assets are treating them and how they look at it.
Yeah, I mean, it's always complicated for them, but I think it's just a quote unquote symptom of like how early we still are in this space, and there's still so much infrastructure that needs to be developed, which I guess is good for us because we're already here and we're excited about the space, and it still has so much room for growth. But yeah, I think that the ETF wrapper, and now with the banks that found a way through the BlackRock ETF to get money involved as well. It's just crypto in general, and specifically Bitcoin, Ethereum. Like, they're getting more and more validity out of the quote unquote real world. So that's all positive.
Yeah, I totally agree. So speaking about a potential ETF, I'm curious to know all of your thoughts about where we might see the price of Bitcoin go after an ETF is approved.
No financial advice there, David.
Hey, no financial advice, of course, but I have two smart colleagues here on this call, and I'm very interested to know, and I won't hold you to a specific number, but how do you see things playing out in the weeks coming up to it, and maybe the weeks after, and where do you think things will go?
Casper can go first.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the narrative seems to be surrounded around whether or not the ETF approval has already been priced in.
Right.
And I think one of the key elements to that question is like, well, are these institutions, are these custodians already able to purchase this asset? Are they starting to increase their treasuries right now? Is that already happening, or is that not happening? Is it more so, just like the people that were already in crypto buying more, considering that they think it's a positive development of the industry? I don't know the actual answer to that, technically speaking, whether they already allowed, like if a BlackRock is already allowed to purchase all that stuff, to essentially front run the presumed demand. But I mean, that's one thing that I think about. And then the other thing is also like, okay, well, is there going to be like a sell? Is it like, what is it? Buy the news, sell the event.
Buy the rumor, sell the fact.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. What I do think is that it's a remarkably interesting time, where how this lines up sort of with the halvening event coming up.
Mm-hmm.
So there's sort of like a double catalyst. So I'm not necessarily conversed or convinced there's going to be a really large jump after the actual approval. Um, I think that what we've seen so far is every time there is some kind of article about new stipulations within the negotiations between the SEC and the other and the funds involved, there's a little bit of an uptick. But yeah, I think that like I personally was thinking that we were gonna get close to like 50, 55 by the end of the year. But every day that passes closer to the end of the year, and I'm not getting my price prediction, I feel less qualified to make another one. So,
David, I'll echo some of what Casper said. And you and I have been having this conversation a long, long time. And I look at it through two lenses. One is, and I absolutely agree with you, Casper, as far as it might be a little bit of buy the rumor, sell effect. But I do look at when we saw Bitcoin's all-time high, David, 2020, something like 64,000. I could be off, give or take there. And that was in the context of the infrastructure was a little bit messier. And I know, Casper, to your point earlier, there's still a lot to build out. The SEC hadn't begun coming down on crypto as hard as it's doing now. But it was really a much more, and I hate the phrase, a much more Wild West environment in 2020 than it is today. I would not have imagined we'd be talking about some of the biggest investment advisors, some of the largest banks holding a Bitcoin ETF. So here's my price prediction, David. And I don't make price predictions generally. But my price prediction is there'll be a sell-off of the fact BTC 100,000 by the end of 2024. And here's the other reason why. And please, everyone in the audience, none of this is investment advice. Please don't bash on me or anyone on the call. I was fascinated by the Fed's recent rate decision and Chairman Powell commentary. And I don't put a lot of credence in, Wall Street counting the number of interest rate cuts that we'll have. But when you hear the chairman of the Federal Reserve allude to potentially 3 interest rate cuts, as we begin to approach probably not free money like we had for a decade, right? Lower interest rates, you'll see a greater chase for yield. And in a regulated ETF, Bitcoin ETF, there is no better place to put money if you're chasing yield in a lower interest rate environment, in my mind.
Yeah, and just like the lower interest rates, it's in general good for risk assets, right?
Yes. Right.
So you have all these different factors that should be positive for risk assets and specifically Bitcoin. So yeah, pending like some kind of wild black swan that appears,
right.
I'm pretty optimistic about it. There's various ranges of people predicting like 250,000,
yes,
etc. And it all depends essentially on like how much actual demand is going to be created by these new instruments.
And Casper, to that point, David, again, the articles and the information that the three of us see, these predictions, minus my ridiculous 100K predictions, come from brokerage firms, come from banks, it's not, Ron sitting in a basement with a calculator trying to come up with an estimate.
Yeah.
Ron,
yeah. The other thing that I'm thinking is like, okay, well, if they're pricing in that many interest rate, cuts, like, what does that mean for the real economy, though? Like, if they're going lower that fast, like, it would probably signal that the economy is not doing that great, which you would think in general is not that great, but for risk assets. But on the other hand, there's not always a one-to-one correlation between quote unquote what's happening on the street and what's happening with money flows and therefore sort of like, Wall Street risk assets, etc. So
there's also the lag, right, David? I'm sorry, David, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm going to go in after you.
Yeah, there's the lag of, look, the Fed needed to raise interest rates because they missed the mark on rising inflation going back 2 years. And you'll see the lag of it beginning to percolate through reduced. We're not looking at demand side inflation anymore. And we're beginning to see job cuts. And there's something like, I'm probably mistaking which firm, so everyone in the audience, please forgive me. I think Adobe is cutting 20% of its workforce, or some other companies. Major companies are cutting double-digit percentages of their workforce, and that tells you that a little bit of the steam is coming out of the employment numbers, which was what the Fed needed to see.
Yeah.
I also think that white collar workers were underreported in this whole cycle. That it feels like that the pool of white collar workers is probably bigger as a percentage of unemployed folks than maybe that's being reported. And so I think that's just anecdotally one thing to be aware of.
But how do we trust the BLS numbers at this point at all? And I don't mean to bash the Bureau of Labor Statistics, but the revisions are crazy compared to what they were 20, 25 years ago.
They're choppy.
Choppy is the right word, David.
Interesting. I think maybe directionally they make sense. But I do think that they are missing the white collar component of it pretty strongly. So before we get to our question, I'm going to share my take. So, I've been thinking about this a lot. And since we've really had meaningful discussions about the BTC ETF, the price has risen from about 26 to 42K. And so my view is that I think we still have some movement upward to maybe like a total market cap for crypto of around 1.8 billion. And so I think, an interim top would be somewhere around 49,000 BTC and maybe 2,800 ETH. And I think around that 1.8 billion level, we'll hit some resistance and then have some sort of sell-off. And it may go for a couple of months. And I think there'll be just some retracement because also so many wallets will at some point profit. And, I don't know if everybody's going to be have the YOLO wallet and just let it ride and see what happens. I think there are other people who have seen these, market moving events in the past and said, you know what, I'm going to take some off here and then see where things go. So if I had to look into my crystal ball, total market cap about 1.8, 1.9 billion, and then somewhere in the range of 48, 49K on BTC.
1.8 trillion on the total crypto market, or
1.8 trillion on the total crypto market cap. Yeah. So that's kind of where I'm looking, and I'll be keeping that in mind. The other thing I'll say for this group is that I really suspect that there'll be a fair amount of volatility around the holidays, and there's just going to be a day you wake up and things will have moved like 3 points one way, 3 points the other way, and that's just part of the fun of the holidays. So
I'm getting a little tired of waking up in the middle of the night seeing the flash on my phone, David, telling me there was like a double-digit move in something. I've got to start shutting off alerts.
Ron's too shy to admit he has like 10 trading alerts when his positions move more than 4%. Especially when his Dogecoin position moves, then he really is.
None of this is investment advice at all.
None at all. So we just got a question in here from Johan Veenstra, if I haven't butchered your name, Johan. Just curious, what are some of the main benefits, disadvantages you guys see for holding a BTC ETF once it does get approved over BTC and let's say a Coinbase account? What do you guys think about that? I certainly have a view, but curious to know yours.
Well, it's an interesting question because it's almost circular, because Coinbase is going to be the custodian of these of the majority of these large ETFs. Like the BTC is going to be held by Coinbase anyways. I think it's just convenience. And I think it's all about like, what are people familiar with? So people are familiar with calling their broker or their money manager saying like, hey, I heard about this ETF. Like I've always been interested in Bitcoin, but let's allocate 0.5% to something like that. As opposed to like, okay, I'm going to make a Coinbase account, and then Coinbase is telling me like, hey, you should probably get a wallet. And now I have like this recovery phrase and I don't really know what that means. And it sort of scares me. So you get back to the custody sort of question. But I think the straight advantage is just convenience.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And, it's also a generational conversation, I suspect. Yeah. When we look at generations certainly older than you guys, they're probably not comfortable, to your point, Casper, opening a Coinbase account or any other crypto exchange account They've probably seen these things around opening a wallet. They've probably seen some of the cybersecurity issues that the news is more than happy to report on. We talked about Ledger.
Certainly, FX didn't help.
Right, exactly. But they're very comfortable even paying fees, having a broker dealer that's going to buy a registered BTC exchange traded fund, and they're happy to hold those in their retirement accounts. It buys them a level of mental security. And honestly, that needs to happen for this ecosystem to evolve.
That's right.
If one of my relatives were asking me about what was the best way to buy some Bitcoin, and there was an ETF with limited fees attached to it, I would consider that approach. I mean, I am a fan of the crypto exchanges, but they are
Agreed.
More difficult to navigate for somebody who hasn't really navigated those before.
And they're not for everyone, right? I mean, I think the three of us have a level of sophistication just being in financial markets, for the length of time the three of us have been in. We're comfortable with a new exchange account, right, David?
Yeah.
Most retirees and most middle-aged folks will not be.
Yeah. And Greg Murphy brings up an interesting point. Owning it in your brokerage account, there's a marginability element to that. That's interesting. I don't think the current grayscale trusts you can have margin on that. But I think on the traditional ETFs, you should be able to have some margin on that.
Yeah.
And as we all know, people do like leverage in the space. So, so I think that's something people want and something people, are interested in.
I don't know. You said marginability and the winds picked up.
Yeah. No risk it, no biscuit. So it is 12:30. So I know you and I, the three of us, could go on for another hour. So I'm going to ask for, give us some thoughts to the end of the year. Where do you think things end up? And think we end up strong? Do we, kind of pause here? Where do you think, Ron, we end up at the end of the year?
We have this year-end conversation a lot, and you and I, a lot of us spend a lot of time trying to understand the mechanics of what's happening. I kind of feel like we end up in a trading range for the balance of the year, minus any exogenous black swan event. Mm-hmm. I think once we get to Jan 5 or Jan 10, we really get to see a big directional move one way or the other. I won't call price points on BTC. We're not going to hit 50 before the end of the year. Could be totally wrong. I have absolutely no idea. The other thing I'm looking at, I continue to look at some of the economic stuff that I think is building the long-term case for crypto assets across global financial markets, and not even touching on DeFi. Casper, we didn't even get to gaming and Web3, which is going to be a multi-triple-digit billion-dollar market in the next several years, double-digit billion. The other thing I'm concerned about, David, and I only mean this half jokingly, it feels like every holiday season, a regulator drops something that just kind of spoils Christmas Eve. I'm hoping that doesn't happen this year, but I am prepared.
Interesting. What about you, Casper? What are you following? What are you thinking about for the end of the year?
I think that it's honestly going to be similar to what has been happening over the last, let's call it a month. I think that pending some exciting news, it's probably going to be relatively flat. There might be some FOMO, as we're sort of nearing that Jan 8th, and maybe, I guess that's to my point of the news. If there's more articles coming out saying hey, now this final detail has been ironed out between BlackRock or Fidelity or Wisdom Tree or whatever, all the funds that are doing it, that might, spur this buying rally. Which could actually be very strong. We've seen some serious gains happening within a week's span. So I think that pending a black swan event, we'll probably have seen sort of between 41 or 40. I don't think we're going to finish below 40, but I think there is a possibility that will edge towards, I don't know, maybe 48 pending good news.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. I feel like there are a lot of buyers sitting around 40K if we were to get down there who'd want to get exposure. I feel like somebody will be up late at night trading it, and we'll wake up in the morning and see, surprise. So I think it's really interesting that way. I do think that if there's any more news that dribbles out around more momentum towards an ETF being approved, that we may see some upward momentum in those last few trading days. So net though, I see us between like 42 and 46. Like I could see that, maybe 44. I think what I'm curious about to see is, do we see Ether make a little run here? It's been really quiet, this past, 6 months, or do we see, we've seen a nice move in some altcoins. Do we see them continuing to move up on, for various reasons during that last week? So I think it's going to be really fascinating next year, guys. And I think the first 2 weeks of next year will really have a lot to tell. But I do think that we're all sort of thoughtful about where we think things will be and where we're positioning ourselves. And I think other people are doing the same thing.
David, there's still a lot of building to do, right? To Casper, your point earlier, still a lot of opportunity, I feel, in the marketplace going forward.
Yes. And the projects that are going to be most successful are the ones that have all of that on the back end, and you have no idea what's happening there. And the front end is just nice, easy, and clean.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And that's why, we won't have time to get into this. That's why I'm so bullish on gaming, because I just feel like it is such a natural gaming, like on Web3 and on the blockchain, is such a natural evolution of what's existed to now. And there's already a willingness to pay extra for that bigger sword or some Barbie outfit or Roblox, that it's just so in nature that people don't know that they might be getting an NFT of a sword or outfit or whatever. So I think that's sort of a very natural progression that we'll see. And I expect, actually, just to finish, I expect the gaming tokens to do well in the last, tail end of the year here, as I'm sure many kids will be playing these games over the holidays.
Indeed.
Well, great. This has been really fun. Casper, we really enjoyed having you on. It's very seamless.
This is great.
I'm headed to the cold this weekend, so I'm gearing up for leaving the 85 behind, but I will be on the East Coast with you guys. Ron, what are you going to be focusing on this weekend?
I'm going to be focusing on the wrap up of the year. The team's putting together all of the great data for all of the stuff we did with members, like all of you and Casper, you and David. We'll be getting that out to members next week. We're working on the strategic roadmap for 2024, which includes trips down up to Boston, down to DC, and probably San Francisco. So there's a lot of stuff we'll be focusing on in 2024. And yeah, that's really the balance of the year for us. But again, it's always a privilege, David. I suspect we'll have to have Casper back and do an entire session on gaming. I think there's so much to dig into there. Every time I think I'm understanding it, there's more research to do.
Yes, I agree. And I suspect there may be an excursion to South Florida in this 2024 travel plan. So we'll work on that.
I'll add it to the travel budget.
Great, guys. Really enjoyed this. Everybody have a good weekend. Get all those presents done, and we will reconvene next Friday. Thanks
Happy holidays, everyone. Take care.
Happy holidays.
Take care.